Hey everyone, it's been over 2 minutes and I haven't been raped yet, which left me with a little bit of time on my hands. Stop playing break free from your chains, to break free from your cage. What we don't want to do is go back to a traditionalist world. Hi, I'm Diana Davison, and today I'm going to be talking to you about an article written by a person who goes by the name Fiedelbogen and published on A Voice for Men. I'm not doing this to attack Fiedelbogen, but to point out why A Voice for Men should not be considered MGTOW central. I'm going to make two arguments here. One, Fiedelbogen is like Zoolander. If you haven't seen that movie, do so, because it's really great. And the second is that AVFM versus MGTOW is like astrology versus astronomy. And the annoyance that the astrologists sometimes express that they're not considered a science like astronomy. And that is the difference between the version of MGTOW that you would find on so-called MGTOW Central, AVFM, versus the MGTOW that you find on YouTube. So to start this out, let's ask the question, how does Fiedelbogen become the champion for A Voice for Men? Here's the analogy.
This is a rush job. He's got to be extremely dim-witted.
You know the profile, Jacobin?
A beautiful, self-absorbed simpleton who can be manipulated and molded like Jell-O.
Or cookie dough.
Play-Doh.
Any kind of dough.
The point is, we need an empty vessel. A shallow, dumb, vacuous moron.
And when he's finished, we dispose of him.
But who? I mean, where in all of God's green goodness am I going to find someone that beast-headed?
He's going for it.
Now let's say in this analogy that the council is the mainstream media, and Paul is MGTOW, who wants the attention of the mainstream media. Mainstream media is paying a lot of attention to MGTOW, and although AVFM gets in there a little bit here and there, the thing that's concerning them is MGTOW, so, of course, Paul's got to take out the competition. MGTOW is an impersonal force which goes its own way. All right, so you can tell from the title of the article alone that they are going to dehumanize the actual men of the MGTOW movement and claim that it's some sort of mystical force. That's one way of eliminating the competition. In recent times, a cultural schism has appeared between two prominent lobes of the non-feminist revolution. First of all, a schism between lobes? Yeah, you've got a schism between lobes, but it's your problem, not MGTOW's. Second, calling MGTOW an anti-feminist revolution? Sorry, that's what AVFM wants to be. They just focus on feminists because they'd rather fight the symptom instead of the cause. MGTOW are doing something different. On the one side, the men going their own way sector, and on the other, the sector loosely grouped around A Voice for Men. Well, thank you for clarifying that. On the one side, we have men going their own way, which is MGTOW, and on the other, we have a ragtag bunch of people trying to claim that AVFM is MGTOW. You've clearly defined the difference. One is men going their own way, and the other is A Voice for Men. We'll be revisiting that statement quite often.
The belief that some Aboriginal tribes hold? It's the concept that a photo might steal a part of your soul.
Well, I guess I would have to answer your question with another question. How many Aboriginals do you see modeling?
The tension between these sectors has grown steadily for 2 or 3 years, but seems to have escalated sharply in the past several months. No, not really. AVFM just keeps saying stupid shit about MGTOW. MGTOW keeps telling them to stop. Last time it happened, they blamed it on you, Fiedelbogen, and they didn't learn from it. They just keep repeating the same mistake.
The calendar was great because it gave people a chance to see a side of my versatility.
I don't want to say either too much or too little. but I'd like to be as impartial as I can while hoping to add something original. As RBK would say, what? If you don't think you're adding something original, why would you bother to actually write this article?
It doesn't mean that we too can't not die in a freak gasoline fight accident.
Perhaps you've already said too much. Yes, many of the ideas sketched here will be uniquely my own, but hey, why not? The better question is, why did you feel the need to write that sentence? Because you're AVFM's patsy. The bone of contention seems to be a fear within the MGTOW sector that the AVFM sector is yielding to something called traditionalism. So to break this down further, what is traditionalism? I will base my talk on what people appear to mean by that word. Okay, a bone of contention is not a fear. You're using that word because you're not impartial. There are legitimate bones to pick with the MGTOW point of view that AVFM presents. Firstly, many in the MGTOW sector have a settled conviction that married men cannot belong to what they consider their movement. So stubborn is their conviction that to question it borders on heresy. You put movement in quotes. Now, in fact, the MGTOW community, there's many people who don't like it referred to as a movement. They prefer to call it a diaspora or a phenomenon. But AVFM actually calls themselves a movement, and you've got movement in quotes as if this is a silly word to use, when in fact the place publishing you defines themselves as being a movement. Next, you use the word heretical, and you probably do that because you know that a large portion of your audience are atheists, and to imply some sort of a religious connection with the way some people are acting is going to get them on your side just by use of language. Despite this, the leading lights of the AVFM sector do make bold to be heretical, contending that married men can indeed partake of MGTOW. And then you call AVFM leading lights. Are you still going to go for that impartiality claim here, Fielbogen?
Yeah, well, fortunately for you, not too many people I know read your little Time magazine or whatever it's called.
Secondly, many in the MGTOW sector have voiced unease at a perceived traditionalism in certain members of the AVFM sector. In their view, this foreshadows a return to old-school gynocentric marriage, along with old-fangled sex roles, and that is a prospect which repels them. Yes, that is true, and there are good reasons for that perception, not the least of which is Paul Elam himself saying things defending traditionalism in order to defend his appointment of a traditionalist to his staff, and then going on to talk about how he answers the door in his home because he's more likely to be intimidating if it's somebody there for bad purpose. Male disposability, anyone? The foregoing has spotlighted the exact traditionalism which MGTOW sectarians believe is creeping into the AVFM community. It is what they generally mean when they toss that word around. No, actually, the foregoing was just a setup to your article. If you were going to be exact, then you would have mentioned specific people like Judgy Bitch. But do carry on. That said, why should MGTOW sectarians even give a toot if AVFM happens to turn traditional? Because AVFM still purports to have an interest in and obligation to the greater MGTOW enterprise. And so long as it does, the question of who owns MGTOW will remain unsettled. What? Why should MGTOW, as you pointed out, MGTOW is a community separate from AVFM, why should they care if AVFM purports to be MGTOW while turning traditionalist? That's your actual question. And then you claim that AVFM, purporting to have an interest, will prevent MGTOW from ever defining themselves, and somehow that's the answer.
Who am I? I don't know. I guess I have a lot of things to ponder.
In other words, the question of MGTOW identity will remain unsettled. Identity, in this case, equates to ownership. Now, the purpose of this sentence is singular. You are telling the MGTOW community, and remember, you've defined them as such. There's the MGTOW community, and then there's this ragtag bunch of people, congregating at a Voice for Men. And you've referred to this as an enterprise. MGTOW is an enterprise. And then gone on to say that MGTOW will never be able to define themselves as long as AVFM continues to try and co-opt the name. I mean, you're not using those words, but that's what you're describing here. And that the point is moot because AVFM isn't going to stop trying to claim MGTOW for themselves.
And when I say brother, I don't mean like an actual brother, but I mean it like the way black people use it, which is more meaningful, I think.
The MGTOW sectarians see MGTOW as a social refuge. Sectarians? Okay, you were just talking about the AVFM supposed MGTOW versus the actual MGTOW, and now I think you're trying to make the actual MGTOW sound like sectarians. Okay, if you are talking about the MGTOW community versus the bigger picture of society, then yes, MGTOW are sectarians. There's a small group. But if you're talking about the comparison between the MGTOW community and AVFM, then AVFM are the sectarians.
A Googleizer, one who speaks at funerals? Or did you think I'd be too stupid to know what a googly was?
Oh yeah, and the word refuge, it's AVFM who has been lately trying to paint the MGTOW community as a bunch of losers who can't get laid. The MGTOW community don't see it as a refuge, they see it as a frontier. They fear that if they admit married men to their fellowship, a camel's nose effect will drive them out of their own tent. This is why control of MGTOW identity, ownership, is important to them to keep the gynocentric traditionalist camel out of their tent. Now, you're going to make a big deal about tents later on in this article, and we'll deal with that when it happens. But for now, what we've got in your analogy is one tent, which is MGTOW, and them trying to keep a camel out. And that's a rational thing to do because camels tend to destroy tents. So if you're talking about the battle between MGTOW and AVFM, then you would think that AVFM is the camel they're trying to keep out. And that's kind of where you were going with this married men can't belong. But really, the camel is traditionalism or gynocentrism. So what we've got is a guy showing up with a camel and saying, I want to come into your tent, which would be fine, except for he says, and I want to bring my camel. And so they're saying you can come into the tent, but you got to fucking leave your camel outside. So I don't really have a problem with the camel and the tent analogy because I think we can agree that camels aren't good for tents.
I mean, maybe I could even have my own institute. We could call it the Derek Zoolander Center for Kids Who Can't Read. Good.
There you have it. The two sides are battling for the MGTOW identity, like two parties contesting for a wishbone. No, they aren't. As you've already said, we've got the MGTOW community and we've got AVFM. The MGTOW community is trying to keep gynocentrism and traditionalism out of MGTOW. And there's no wishbone here. You know, people taking a side of a wishbone and pulling is not really a contest, it's mystical thinking. The whole reason it's called a wishbone is because there was this idea that if you got the bigger half, then your wish would come true. And a lot of people figure that the best wish is the one that decides which side breaks, but it's not. It's the weakest side that breaks. And if you look at a wishbone, you can usually pick the winning side quite easily. And there are no sides here. There's MGTOW and there's AVFM. I am aware, however, that AVFM never wished for such a battle. It just came to them. How are you aware of this, Feidelbergen? I'm aware of what actually happened. I was actually the proofreader on Peter Wright's MGTOW Central article, and he was laughing in my ear as we went through this article, talking about how it was going to piss off the YouTube MGTOW community. So to say that they didn't wish for this, to say that they didn't ask for it, is just bullshit. Obviously you just don't know. You don't know better. Let's write it off to that.
Happy. Nothing to worry about at all.
So has it occurred to anybody that nobody really owns the MGTOW identity at all and never will? Come to that, has it occurred to anybody to wonder if there even is a MGTOW identity? What a bunch of drivel. If there's no MGTOW identity, what are we even talking about? And yes, it did occur to the YouTube MGTOW. That's what makes them great, is YouTube unlike ABFM, is not a platform that they own themselves, which means that there's a free marketplace of ideas, that they can't prevent somebody else from starting a MGTOW channel on YouTube and challenging what they have to say. Whereas on ABFM, you only get published if Paul decides that he wants you being published on there, and their echo chamber is growing all the time, rapidly actually. Used to be that Paul would publish things that he didn't agree with, and that's not the case anymore. There's a lot more control going on and silencing of people, as you can see in their comments section. MGTOW getting banned from MGTOW articles. By a woman, no less.
I do not like Snoopy reporter with lack of fashion sense. Not one little bit.
I leave those questions open, but I'll get back to them later. For now, I pose a singular query. What is MGTOW? And until we have sorted that one out, we needn't hope to sort out the tangled mess we've talked about so far. The tangled mess is yours, Fiedelbogen. You've created a tangled mess out of something quite simple. All right, so what is MGTOW? Oh, what, that thing you just said can't be defined? All right, go ahead. MGTOW is an acronym that stands for Men Going Their Own Way. That phrase evokes men walking down a road they have freely chosen, literally, their own way. Ah, I see. It's merely an acronym, one that can be pronounced even. In the context of history, MGTOW signifies the objective political reality where men, as a class, currently find themselves. Under the system of feminist innovation which now predominates, men are second-class citizens. Moreover, this reality is not static. It promises to get worse when feminist innovation develops further. I say all this with the understanding that my target audience already knows why men are second-class citizens. They have covered that ground as thoroughly as I have, so I needn't waste time explaining it to them. That's just ABFM anti-feminist thing. You're not talking about MGTOW here at all. Well, I sped through that because it's mostly just ABFM rhetoric, but I should actually address that after saying that MGTOW are sectarian, he's now just claimed that MGTOW is a condition that all men find themselves in. So it's a universal. He also wants to talk about history, as ABFM is very fond of doing, because...
Look, I gotta go pee, but I'd really like to continue talking about this conversation when I come back.
Dead men from history can't argue with you when you want to try and redefine what they were doing or characterize it in a way that isn't actually, the truth of the matter. So history works really well for people who aren't able to defend their ideas in the current marketplace.
Let's get back to the reason that we're really here. Without much further ado, I give you the Derek Zoolander Center for Kids Who Can't Read Good.
Returning to our theme. Under such conditions, the system of social obligation which formerly bound men either to women or to society as a whole is voided of moral authority. Hence it may, at individual discretion, be nullified. Individual discretion? I thought you just said it's a condition that all men find themselves in. Briefly then, MGTOW signifies the death of the social contract and the liberation of all males into a system of individual agency, where they may form an ad hoc social contracts as they see fit. Such is the objective reality of history. One might wish it otherwise, but that is how things are. Who, Feidelbogen? Who would wish it otherwise? I mean, are you talking about male liberation and somebody not wanting that? Or are you talking about the ad hoc social contracts that you mentioned and how some of those might be unfortunate? One of those, what kind of contracts are you talking about? The contract of marriage? Because yes, that's very unfortunate. And MGTOW do definitely wish it otherwise. Note, however, that MGTOW signifies merely freedom, leaving open the question of what should be done with it. Not really. It's not open to the option of men giving up their freedom, which is what a guy does when he gets married. Accordingly, we use MGTOW in a political or world historic way and would stipulate that the realm of personal relations does not fall within its purview. That is to say, there is no MGTOW manual to specify how any man should govern that aspect of his life. Now, who is this we using MGTOW and stipulating things? Was it not Paul Elam who just did a video saying that he was going to use MGTOW like he uses the feminists? And also, you just finished saying that MGTOW is about the individual and their ability to make decisions about their associations and contracts. And now you're saying it's not about the personal, that it's not, the personal relations don't fall within the purview. Make up your mind, dude. Make up your mind.
Or did you think I'd be too stupid to know what a googly was?
So MGTOW is rooted in the political, not the personal, although it certainly has implications for the personal. The personal choice to not engage in gynocentric institutions like marriage is what has had an effect, right? So what you're calling the political is based on personal choices, but you're saying that the individuals and the personal choices are kind of irrelevant. So what if guys decided to choose marriage and stop being noticeable in society for rejecting gynocentric institutions like that? Miraculously, MGTOW would still exist. In itself, MGTOW is not a clique, club, cult, coterie, or tribe of any sort, and nothing in the present statement should be taken to imply this. So it is incorrect to attach the indefinite article and speak of the individual as a MGTOW, since that implies club membership. Really? You're going to resort to semantics?
It doesn't mean that we too can't not die in a freak gasoline fight accident.
Similarly, MGTOW is not a personal identity dog tag. So again, to call yourself a MGTOW is not a very MGTOW move at all. The phrase, a MGTOW, is a flawed grammatical construction because MGTOW is an abstract noun, and no man is identical with an abstract noun. You could, of course, style yourself more verbosely as a man who goes his own way, but that is rather a natural descriptor rather than an appellative tag. Also, nobody and no group has any patent on such a phrase. Well, why not call yourself a MGMOW, a man who's going my own way? Because it's not really natural to refer to yourself in the third person as a man going his own way. Wouldn't it be better if we had MGMOW? And, of course there is MGHOW already. And, if Peter Wright had his way, we'd have WIGTOW, and we'd also have PIGTOW, people going their own way together. Really, MGTOW describe themselves as a MGTOW because they want to promote that label for people to go and find out about. So the way that MGTOW gains popularity is by referring to itself in a consistent way. And that's why they do it, because they're less concerned with grammar than they are concerned with making people aware of the MGTOW phenomenon. In the end, MGTOW is no more than 1, a principle or force of history, and 2, a high-altitude situation map of the male condition. What? It's an invisible force just somehow, afflicting people's brains and causing them to do things? It's a map? What's it a map of? Who drew the map? And what's on this map? Is it not a map of men who are separating themselves? Kind of like, let's go with the map analogy, an island that breaks off from the mainland. And so the MGTOW who find themselves on this island were basically just there geographically, that they had nothing to do. They didn't dig a trench around themselves to create the island. They just happened to be on that piece of land that mystically separated. And also remember that you've said that all men are part of the MGTOW community. So, where's this map? How is this map taking place? And who's in it? Who's on this land? What we have sketched here is the MGTOW core minimum. Anything less would insufficiently describe MGTOW, and anything more would be bells and whistles. So I turn again to the question of MGTOW identity, or ownership. Now that we have inventoried what makes MGTOW fundamentally MGTOW, we may interrogate this more to the purpose. Inventoried? Okay, you've already called it an enterprise, and now you're taking inventory? I think this really is AVFM's version of MGTOW, where they're trying to turn it into a business and calling it political instead of personal. Your inventory so far has MGTOW as a disembodied force. It's a map, It's a tent. It's an objective political reality, but really just an acronym with flawed grammatical construction when used by actual people describing their actual lifestyle. Since MGTOW is a demographic phenomenon, nobody owns it. It simply is. So ultimately, the MGTOW principle itself goes its own way. What? MGTOW doesn't require the men to exist. It's just a thing on its own that goes its own way, without men. And yet it's a demographic. It springs from the reality of history, and you either tap into it or you don't. It's like an ocean wave that beckons you to hang 10 and be powerfully carried along, but it does not belong to you. It paradoxically serves, but will not be commanded, and you cannot understand it otherwise. Alright, so now MGTOW is a tent, a map, a political reality that's just a flawed acronym, a disembodied force which is also a demographic, and it's a wave in the ocean.
Moisture is the essence of wetness. And wetness is the essence of beauty.
So you are free to form all the MGTOW clubs you wish, with membership rules as you see fit. But keep in mind that MGTOW doesn't belong to your club alone. You are not, in and of yourselves, MGTOW. You are not identical with that abstract noun. You are simply a group of people surfing on the wave of history, organized around the MGTOW principle in a manner that suits you. And that is fine. That is good. That is your right. But never forget that the MGTOW principle is something far bigger than you, and bigger than all of us. Now we've got another one. MGTOW is an abstract noun as well. That implies that it's not tangible, that you can't see it or hear it, and that kind of denies the fact that MGTOW is only really got its name because a bunch of guys are using social media to talk and to express their ideas and to become visible, to grow their community in a way that's visible to society. It's, in the end, not really that abstract at all. Even so, I think there is an overarching philosophical mandate to all of this, and I have tried to catch a glimmer of it here. No, what you've done is subject your reader to a bunch of pseudo-intellectual drivel.
Let's get back to the reason that we're really here.
I should add that I roundly applaud the marriage strike, both as a strategy for male survival and as a political leveraging tool to extort proper treatment of the male population. So what, did the wave, the ocean wave, create this strategy? Because, there's no actual people involved here, no tangible people. MGTOW generally agree that they're not trying to extort anything from women. They don't care what women want from them. There's no extortion here. That's what ABFM is trying to do. They are trying to reform. MGTOW are abandoning, and ABFM are trying to reform. That's one of the big differences between the two groups. So fear not. You can swear off marriage and all relations with women, and you will have my blessing every step of the way. I mean, hey, admit it. That's the main thing you're really worried about, right? No, they're worried about guys who need MGTOW and are looking for MGTOW ending up on ABFM's site and hearing bullshit like what you're spouting right now. That's pretty much what they're worried about.
Happy. Nothing to worry about at all.
However, the point where I go my own way is the idea that the marriage strike makes the principal focus for MGTOW-related thought, rhetoric, or action. No, I see the marriage strike as merely a subplot, or rather, one of many projects that could manifest the MGTOW principle as a force in history. Okay, now it's your straw man, Fiedelbogen, that MGTOW is solely concerned about marriage being kept out of MGTOW. And, you've acknowledged in here that MGTOW, what they're doing is potentially something that's going to go down as a force in history, something of note, and it's manifesting, and yet you're still maintaining that it's an abstract force that isn't actually personal, it's political. And even if you beat your straw man to hay, you still haven't shown that MGTOW are wrong, that marriage is incompatible. Here's a related point that I don't want to omit. Male solidarity should be grounded in the political and world historic side of things. It should not be centered on personal frustrations about women and relationships. The latter, if voiced within earshot of the general public, sets you up to be the butt of mockery. What's more, it sounds like a form of gynocentrism, doesn't it? Alright, so you claim to understand MGTOW, and then here you are telling them what they should or shouldn't talk about because, if they talk about women and relationships, then they're going to be the butt of social mockery. And yet, you seem to think that you understand what going your own way means, not caring about social norms and conventions, and yet MGTOW, under AVFM guidelines here, I guess, because that's who's published this, is saying that we ought to care about the mockery from the public. But of course, only in this instance. Only if you're from the actual MGTOW community. Because remember, you have defined this as a battle between MGTOW and A Voice for Men. Then you go on to accuse the MGTOW community of being gynocentric, which is that camel in your own analogy that they're working so very hard to keep out of MGTOW. Very well. So, if a married man would express solidarity with MGTOW, who's to tell him that he mustn't do that? They haven't done that, you asswipe. They've made it very clear that they welcome the support of married men, as long as those men don't call themselves MGTOW. Furthermore, if by personal genius or luck of the draw, he finds the perfect mate and succeeds wildly at self-realization despite her presence, then he's not well and truly going his own way? Can you plausibly argue otherwise? Certainly, such a man has found his own path. Yes, he has, and that path is not MGTOW. So how, if he literally calls himself a MGTOW, and starts a MGTOW website and a MGTOW publishing company, and paints a giant MGTOW logo on his house? What of that? Would you send the one true MGTOW posse to burn that pretender down? I think not. So who are you to tell this man he doesn't pertain to MGTOW? On what authority do you speak? Yours, apparently. But what about his? You reckon that he gives one cold spit about your presumed authority and what you think? And why should he? Alright, Feidelberg, you just finished telling guys that they need to be careful what they say and do because the general public is going to laugh at them. And now you're saying that a guy going around painting MGTOW on his house shouldn't care about the actual MGTOW community laughing at him. I think you've got it backwards. I think that when you're MGTOW, you need to pay more attention to what the other MGTOWs are saying and less to the general public. And you're saying the reverse, that MGTOW shouldn't actually build and grow their own community by talking about their issues because the general public's going to laugh at them. And in the meantime, that they should refrain from laughing at other people claiming to be MGTOW who don't understand the first thing about what makes a man MGTOW and don't want to engage in the conversation about it. It's Zoolander in the flesh.
You think you're too cool for school. But I got a news flash for you, Walter Cronkite. You aren't.
In the end, all that matters is that a man can make the MGTOW principle work for him and his own life according to his innovative genius. After all, a man going his own way goes his own way, does he not? And does such a man make social arrangements with other men for the sake of mutual benefit? You bet he does. Well, it's not a man's relationship to other men that's the concern here. It's his relationship to women.
You serious? I just told you that a moment ago.
Right.
In fact, oddly enough, even men who only wish to be left alone can stick together. But none of that, in itself, is MGTOW. It is only a manifestation of MGTOW, a way of harnessing the MGTOW principle and putting it to work. Right. MGTOW, that mystical principle that doesn't actually have anything tangible to it, and it's just a wave, but you're going to harness it, you know. So it's not a wave, or maybe it is a wave, but it's just the harness that's like made of water that's on a horse now. So I renounce the indefinite article. I am not a MGTOW, nor do I belong to any club bearing that name. I am simply a respecter of the MGTOW principle as a force in history. Well, I agree with you here. I don't think you're a MGTOW either. Neither do you belong to an actual MGTOW club. I'm gonna disagree in that you have respect for MGTOW because you've spent a lot of words, this article in particular, convincing me that you don't have respect for MGTOW. To summarize, MGTOW is not an identity, but merely a fact. No, to summarize, MGTOW is now a tent, a map, merely a bad acronym, an objective political reality, but also an individual painting his house because the force told him to do so. It's a mystical, intangible force that can somehow be harnessed. It's a wave in the ocean that can't be harnessed, and it's an abstract noun, but also a demographic. Perhaps, seeing how you think MGTOW is a mystical force, you should do what the metaphysicians do, which is try to explain it by saying what it is not. What have you said MGTOW is not? You've said that it is not a refusal to marry, and it is not a discussion about what is wrong with women and relationships. This is why we're worried about people like you and AVFM in general being MGTOW central.
They'll be looking for us at Maury's, right? But they won't be looking for... not us.
Meanwhile, the MGTOW sectarians are facing a boundary crisis. They are worried about their little tent, while forgetting that MGTOW is a big tent. Their fears are groundless, for they can always pitch any little tent they want to pitch, and decide who gets in or who doesn't. But they must understand that there is plenty of MGTOW to go around, and that, for heaven's sake, nobody wants to steal their piece of the action. And now, back to the tent. The beginning of your article, you had MGTOW as a singular tent with the reasonable desire to keep a camel out, because camels wreck tents when they get inside. That is why the camel's nose effect became a known expression. Camels are acknowledged to be tent wreckers. But now you say that MGTOW tent is a small tent inside of a bigger tent, which is also MGTOW, and that AVFM's tent is next to the MGTOW tent, but only next to the micro MGTOW tent. Then you say that they are worried about who gets in to the little MGTOW tent, forgetting that it's not the camel rider who is the problem. Any guy can go in the tent as long as he gets off his camel and leaves it behind. And why is the camel in the tent in the first place in this analogy? Who let the camel in? If your multiple tent analogy stands, then you've got a few tent owners trying to keep the camel out of the big tent, and some of the tent owners saying that they don't mind that camel being in the tent and they ought to just leave the camel alone. But dude, the camel's gonna wreck your tent. And AVFM tenters are willing to take that risk because they have a harness on the camel? How many tents are there? What's outside of the bigger MGTOW tent? Are there endless tents? Other MGTOW tents that are bigger than the big MGTOW tent? Are there little tents that are inside of the smaller tents? Your analogy is just plain falling apart. Maybe there are endless tents, and it doesn't matter how many camels get in because we'll just keep making more tents.
Press the apple thing. Our cool. Then we're no better than the machine.
And so I rest my case. Feidelbogen, is the Zoolander of the men's rights movement. And unfortunately, AVFM published this crap under the premise that they are MGTOW Central. And that's why it's important to address the issues. We don't want people going there thinking that this article actually describes the phenomenon of MGTOW. And Feidelbogen, you ought to take your own advice. The last sentence of your article. So, hey man, like, don't bogart that MGTOW, man. Pass it around. My advice to you is to stop smoking all that weed. I've been told you used to make good videos. And he's been hired by Mugatu, or Paul, who has now seen that his assassin has failed to complete the job. Guess he's gonna have to try and do it himself.
I invented the piano key necktie! I invented it! What have you done, Derek? Nothing! You've done nothing! Nothing! And I will be a monkey's uncle if I have you ruin this for me! Because if you can't get the job done, then I will!
Oh yeah, almost forgot, rape joke of the week. I called a 1-800 number claimed to be a hotline for rape advice. Unfortunately, it was only for victims.